Hello, everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes. Welcome to this webinar. We will introduce the panelists very shortly. Just, give everyone a few minutes to make sure they've clicked on. So once again, thanks for everyone for joining this Tauranga Chamber of Commerce Thought Leadership Thursday session. And I'll shortly introduce all the guests. So we've got 20 on so far.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the whole city, including myself, is affected by this Vodafone outage. So I've had to pop across to my sister's place in Pepper just to use her Spark network. So there could be a few less people than we anticipated, but let's see how it all gets on. Great. If anyone has any, everyone can feel free to use the chat that we've got set up. If you've got any questions or what.
I've got about 5 years in Tauranga now, Matt, so getting on there.
Yes.
And probably about 15 years in the Waikato. So I have been involved with Urban Design Panel in Hamilton over a 5-year period, and also the Hamilton River Plan Group, which was a think tank of 12 people, including the mayor and the council, 2 councillors, iwi, and a number of other stakeholders. I've only got a short period of time, but I wanted to focus on these things. These 3 words: disruptive, innovative, and collaborative. So I found myself in this space in the last 4 to 5 weeks, going into lockdown and then out. I lost my 2 biggest projects, which are on the back of about 5 years of work. One is in hospitality, it's a hotel project, and the other one is a district health board project. Significant multi-million-dollar projects, which involve a bigger team from my design engine team, and a number of people, contractors, subcontractors, etc. One was shovel ready, ready to start on site. So quite a significant setback. 2 losses there. But as I went in just before the lockdown, there were 5 projects that came up under the CIP, which is the Crown Infrastructure projects. They're also looking for shovel ready projects. And they range from transport projects to innovations in transport, multi-story buildings, new housing, that sort of thing. So the point that I wanted to make is, you know, we've all had losses with this in some ways, but we can come out of it with huge positives as well. I wanted to talk about quality of life. I've had a lot more time with my family, and also been running and kayaking and swimming, because fortunately I've got some water resources near me. And just the opportunities of that, a better quality of life. The other thing, I've been set up for 5 years with my technology. And so I've been living like this for a long period of time. And hopefully we can all actually work sort of a split week in future, because our meetings are shorter and sharper, and the technology is actually helping us all. So there we go, with some positive ideas. Thank you.
Oh, look, that's great. Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, there's some common themes that we're running through each of those addresses. They relate to property, as well as our own thinking about ourselves and thinking about us as a customer and how we are changing our lives, and maybe how businesses should start to change and reflect on what their value proposition is. I was just wondering whether, and of course, just wanting to introduce Anne Pankhurst in the corner. We weren't too sure whether I was able to make it or not. Hey, Anne. And she was going to co-host with me, but since I turned up, Anne's more than happy to speak and help me host if you like.
Thank you.
Great. Look, I was just wondering whether we can start off with the very first question, which is around with our borders closed. It's obviously impacting on tourism, net migration, our seasonal labour. And I was just wanting to pick apart, I think there are a few common themes around property and construction. Mark, you identified some of your projects that aren't working. What do you think would be the view or the pipeline for the next sort of 9 to 18 months? Yeah, from your perspective.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to share. One huge shift that's happened over the last 4 to 5 weeks is that I found my colleagues from the Institute of Architects and also the engineers and other consultants very open and engaging. So you touched on this earlier, where people are sort of, I think it was Heather that said, people are going to have to, sort of focus on new skills and try and share resources. So I've had a number of architect colleagues reach out and suggest where they've had multidiscipline practices where the engineering part of it could actually be shared around to other practices, you see. So this idea of actually collaboration and working together and helping each other, I think is awesome, because normally there's quite a lot of competition and sort of divisiveness between us. I think it's camaraderie and a collegiate approach is coming through firmly, and everyone's scrambling for work in the building industry. I've just noticed there's sort of a desperation.
Okay. Mark, did you want to follow up on your thoughts on the construction sector?
Yeah, look, that's obviously a sector that is going to feel not the full brunt of this, not to the degree that hospitality or tourism will, but it will definitely feel the effects. And I guess you just need to think about where we've come from. Migration's a big drive economic growth nationally for probably a good 5 or 6 years, and you would expect that to be more subdued going forward. So that will be one factor. I guess, construction and sort of the supply of housing and so forth in particular is one of those things where it tends to sort of always play catch up. And for whatever reason, you look back through history, as soon as we get that sort of supply response coming on, it always comes belatedly, like it's just coming on now, 5 years too late. And as is always the case, as soon as you get that supply response coming on, something happens and sort of the demand sort of drops away for whatever reason. So it always seems to be a bit of a mismatch. I think we're just going to have to work our way through that. There will be demand, it'll just be a little bit lower. Housing affordability is something that comes up in this region regularly anyway, and a bit of the heat coming out of the market is certainly not a bad thing. I don't think that's something we should be upset about. We have got low interest rates permanently. They're not going up again. That's a permanent structural move down in interest rates. And we've had the Reserve Bank sort of loosen up credit sort of conditions and the sort of rules that are in place on the lending institutions. Now, I think one of the reasons they've done that is because those banks themselves are getting a little bit more frugal with who they lend to. So there's a bit of a sort of give and take sort of aspect there. I think what will be really interesting, and it's been raised by a couple of people now, is the behavioural changes that we'll see from consumers and just in terms of the way we live. So you think about this working for home infrastructure. Overnight, we've built this infrastructure, haven't we? At Craig's, we've got sort of 540 staff across New Zealand. 90-something% of us are working from home, and we just turned it on like that, and it works. By and large, for most of us, it works. Not for everybody, all situations are different, but for a good chunk of us, it's working fine. And that will be the case for many sort of office workers and others right across the country. So will we all go back to the office in the same sort of numbers? Probably not. There will be many pockets of businesses that will choose to work from home partly or to a degree, and you've got to think about the flow-on effects for how much rental space do we need in these commercial office buildings. Do we all be wanting, do businesses need to pay an arm and a leg for this expensive office space, or can we do things a little bit smarter? And those sorts of things, I think, will flow through to what you see in terms of the construction industry, the need for sort of property and so forth right across the board.
Right. Heather, you had in your opening remarks, you had flagged on a number of opportunities that I think Mark Lister was just inferring to. So maybe you want to flesh that out a bit more?
I think, yeah, following on from Mark, I think what's really critical is if we're looking at the fact that we might have a lot more of a hybrid model where we're working from home and we may maybe touch base once or twice a week. Actually, I think it's really critical that we look at this as a full ecosystem. And actually, how do we create those commercial buildings as vibrant spaces so that when people are going, we're actually there to be able to collaborate? So how do we put in these commercial spaces, and how do we think about planning of putting the right collaboration bodies together So actually, we actually are creating a more of an ecosystem in the Bay, or even across New Zealand at a bigger level, to actually create value. Because all of a sudden, I mean, traditionally, we've all been locked away in our own little buildings. Us at the university, we have our university building, Mark in his offices, the other Mark in his office, often at home, but we do that, we stay away from each other. This is giving us an opportunity to say, what can we do different, and how can we do it differently, and how can we bring ecosystems together to collaborate, to share their knowledge, to be able to make us a stronger nation, but also allow us to think about those opportunities that we've never thought about before, because we've all been in our own industries. So it's almost also thinking about vertical industries, how we can get different industries to talk to each other. And I think if we can create vibrant commercial spaces, because of the fact that people might be working more often from home, and we don't need to have office buildings 24/7 located to one or allocated to one organisation, I think we've got some great opportunities to do some really great stuff moving forward. But part of that also is thinking about, I say we've got these opportunities, but we've also got the requirement to get the right skill sets to start thinking about those opportunities. And I think there's a whole another piece about where do we upskill, retool, rethink about new ways of doing things so that we've got the right mindsets to be able to do this.
Mark Wassung, oh, sorry.
Just, it was suggested last week that potentially landlords, tenants and developers are all going to have to get together to discuss exactly what that rental space or commercial rental space is looking like, and that we are going to need to collaborate and not think high rentals or exactly as Mark said, what does the space look like into the future? So that's probably, you've all picked up on that unintentionally as well.
Mark Wassung?
Yeah, I'd like to chip in there. Heather, the space that I work in is I've been caught out there and a little bit, blue sky thinking and that sort of thing. And so that's just the domain that I've always lived in since a kid. Okay, so it's pretty hard though, because you take the criticism. But I just want to focus on an example that was done in 2016. And Matt, you'll know it, and the Tauranga Connect design, the multimodal transport network. And it's not a plug for the design, because it was actually mostly driven by me, but there was a team behind it. And basically, just quickly, it was about intensifying Cameron Road and the Te Papa Peninsula and sort of connecting it to the CBD. So allowing, putting transport lines down first, fast, frequent, reliable, different modes, and then putting new housing around that so we could extend our city within our city limits rather than suburban sprawl like Te Tumu and Tauranga West. The point that I'm making is that work that was done in 2016 was, when I did go to regional council and city council, called out there and a little bit blue sky thinking, and it can't be done. But now you would have seen, if you've gone to the live stream of the council this week, there's the Te Papa Peninsula business case. And so the point that I'm making is that one of the points that I've got in my notes here is to get people to come forward with their ideas. So don't be afraid of that, because council does listen. Often council gets a bad rap, and there's they talk about no cohesion and that sort of thing. But it was an 11-0 vote, which is fantastic for our city. And they're talking about a 20-30 year lifespan, or a future sort of period, rather than 1 year or 6 years, 10 years, that sort of thing, which is fantastic. So they take into account urban form and transport, which are overlapped. Okay, just to bring this back now to a current project. So the idea of vision and planning, master planning, and tracking ahead, and keying to what you've said, Heather. I'm actually working on a building that exactly articulates what you've just talked about. So it's only been about 2 weeks in the making, and I'm collaborating with engineers and architects, and we're going through an adaptive reuse design project on a project in Tauranga. It's a building that's historically quite problematic and it's quite prominent, but I can't elaborate beyond that. But we've come up with an amazing innovation for this building, which hasn't been looked at before. And it involves exactly those ecosystems that you're talking about. It involves public spaces where people can cross over to get their fresh coffee and breads, etc., and come together over art gallery spaces and things like that. And it's multi-purpose, so it's looking at how we interact differently, plus overlapping it with transport. So I just wanted to enthuse about that, because that's probably going to be only really going to happen in 5 years' time.
Yeah, look, you've touched on something there around what's happening in the Te Papa Peninsula, and I just see a question come through from Peter McKinley, which was asking around how much of a risk for business is the increased inequality of COVID-19 that COVID-19 is creating. And I suppose Te Papa Peninsula, increased density, there's obviously a variety of different communities along the Te Papa Peninsula with different socioeconomic issues, and using that spine, particularly I'd imagine a lot of students will be living in Gate Park and using Cameron Road to get to the university CBD campus. I was just wondering on what are the impacts, broadly speaking, of COVID-19 in terms of social inequality, and what's the impact on business, and potentially how can we work achieve good economic outcomes while also achieving good social outcomes? Because I noticed that the region has proportionally far less social housing stock than many other regions. So just wondering who wants to start off.
I'm happy to go with that if you like. Hi, Peter. If you're listening in there, obviously the questions come from you. Peter, you'd be heartened to hear that affordable housing has been on our radar for about 10 years. And just recently, in the last couple of years, things have really geared up regarding modular construction and also 3D printing. And we're actively involved with innovative projects for the Bay. And I'd say watch this space in the next, say, 3 to 4 months. So it's 2 years in the making. And we're going to be looking at trying to make savings of up to 50 to 60%, and in some cases 70% of traditional construction. So I've always been passionate about this since university. Housing was one of my electives, and coming from South Africa, affordable housing is a large complement of our stock. So, but we're talking about, smart housing, well insulated, durable, non-leaking, and variety. 2-bedroom studios, 1 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, basically adding to our stock. And you don't need to have a car, and not everyone has to come to the city by car. They could use their scooter or their electric bike or a rapid transit system, which is buses first, and perhaps light rail in the future, or other forms of technology that we don't know about yet, that we'll be developing. So I'm involved with another project, which is a futuristic vehicle, which is clean burning. So we touched on that earlier about reducing carbon footprint and clean burning. So autonomous and electric vehicles, those sort of things.
Okay, great. Heather, do you have any thoughts? You were nodding your head.
Mainly my nodding was in agreement in terms of, yes, I do think there are going to be issues with inequality coming out of this, but I think we want to make them short-term, not long-term. We want to basically recognise that there will be inequality, but we don't want it to stick with us on a long term. I think some of that comes down to just exactly what Mark was talking about, these projects which are looking about trying to allow people to engage, but also thinking about some of those small businesses, some that might not exist coming out of this, which is the opportunity is actually, how could I reskill? How could I retool? And I suppose this is where the university comes in. And one thing the university, especially us in professional programs, are looking for is, what does business want? What does the customer actually want? And not asking us to provide, but actually saying, we need this. How can we collaboratively work together to be able to deliver it? Because I look at it from education from a number of viewpoints. There's the undergraduate, the person coming out of high school. They're always going to be there in some form or the other. There's those high professionals who want to come back after possibly 20 years worth of work. But now there's that opportunity of those that are in their mid-20s to mid-30s who actually need to retool and reskill. But they need to do it in conjunction with what business is actually focusing on in the future. So I think we need to make sure that business is talking to the university, not expecting us to come up with solutions without business's input. I think we're in a really critical time where I'd reach out and say, business, if you're wanting digital, that's great. What sort of digital skills do you want from your people you're going to employ moving forward in the future? And let's collaboratively work at doing that. So we've actually got work-ready people. And it's almost like utilising your studies as part of your journey towards work, and you're actually doing applied projects as you go. It's bringing in the like of the council and saying, hey, we're working on doing this in our city. How can you work on projects as students? So you've got that mindset, you've already got that understanding of how it works. So to me, yes, there is going to be inequality. Let's make it short term versus long term. And in the long term, let's look about how we can actually ensure that we're allowing those that do potentially lose their jobs because of their businesses have completely had to pivot. How do we do that where we can actually educate them with business being our partner in this?
Yeah. Mark, did you have anything further to add on it?
Yeah, look, I think sort of one of the key things we sort of need to keep in mind there is, and Heather touched on this earlier in some of her other comments, is this all comes back to sort of what the consumer wants, what doesn't it? At the moment, you've sort of got this government safety net where everyone's getting sort of a wage subsidy and a support net, and in all honesty, that is a very blunt tool. So that is supporting businesses that genuinely we want to support, and it's also probably supporting marginal businesses that never really sort of stacked up and sort of might not sort of come through this in a strong manner. At some point, that's going to expire, and it's going to boil down to the pure and simple function of consumers and all of us with a little bit less money in our pocket collectively than we might have had a year ago. We will drive where the demand is, and whether it's sort of the property industry or the construction industry or the business community or the educational providers, they will have to respond to that demand. So if there is growing demand for these hybrid spaces, because we're all doing sort of the hybrid model of working from home, then there will be more demand for that, and the funding will come, and there will be a return on all of those. And you look at the business spectrum, businesses that can pivot to all the things that are growing more through this, the winners of COVID and life after COVID, at least in the short term, will be anyone that is doing things digitally, you know, with look at us now doing conference like this, anyone that can sort of position a business like that, pivot to be more related to e-commerce, all of those sort of themes that are growing. So many businesses that I talk to right up and down the country are already making those changes, and they're already seizing the opportunity. They want to get in first, and they've seen part of their business less in demand, and they've looked to where there is more demand. And I think that is just going to be survival of the fittest. You are going to see businesses that can make that transition and deliver what people want in a slightly different looking world, they'll succeed, and others might not. And workers need to think in the same way. You know, if we just literally don't need as many doing XYZ job or ABC job, that might just be the reality of the situation. People need to think about, how can I transfer my skills? Maybe they need to re-educate themselves. Obviously, we need to sort of provide support to those sort of that fall through the gaps as best we can. But, you know, the winners will be the people that sort of make this transition. It's not the first time the world has seen a transition like this.
Yeah, no, I'm pleased, and all of you have touched on what are the customers' views. We're seeing a massive increase in conscious, values-based purchasing from customers, whether that's environmental or social. We've also seen a big pickup of doing business for a purpose, and that's, you know, hospitality, people looking to feed homeless. We've seen, you know, clothing manufacturers looking to clothe homeless and other school children as well, and same with in the digital space, looking to make sure that we're helping out those that perhaps aren't being connected with the education system. So doing business with a purpose, I think is going to be a massive change that COVID-19 will really double down on, and perhaps that's a good thing, rather than just doing it for the sake of making money.
I think you're right to a point, Matt. No, you're right across the board, but I think what's going to be interesting is that people are going to have less money in their pocket beyond this period, aren't they? And people are going to be faced with a choice where doing the right thing will sometimes cost them a little bit more than, you know, maybe sort of how things were before. And we need to think about that, thinking even more broadly. One of the global effects post-COVID is that you're going to see businesses and governments and industries bring their supply chains closer to home. So all these governments and industries around the world now are thinking about, geez, it was actually quite high risk for me to get all of those widgets out of China and those widgets out of Mexico and then sort of bring them home and put them together, because we've seen supply chain blockages, shutdowns, and logistical issues. So now you've got a lot of industries thinking, well, you know, maybe we want to sort of do a little bit more of our manufacturing or get some of those inputs from closer to home. And that's a good thing, because it means you might sort of see new industries pop up and so forth. But it also is going to mean that things might get more expensive, because one of the reasons inflation's been so low over the last few decades is because the rise of China being the factory of the world, Vietnam, all of those regions. So I think you've got a really interesting sort of push-pull environment in terms of what people want to do and sort of, you know, what is in the cold hard light of day of their financial constraints and sort of pricing issues. Yeah, there's multiple dynamics at work there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good time to change topics around following on with logistics and what is our relationship with our neighbouring regions like the Waikato, following on from the Port of Tauranga's relationship with Tainui and Hamilton, with government's discussions around what's the future of Ports of Auckland. Should that be a focus in terms of supply chains, our relationship with the Waikato government looking to invest a lot in infrastructure? Should the Bay of Plenty and Waikato relationship, mainly transport networks, if not further, be a big focus for the government? Anyone?
I'll go on that one. Thanks, Matt. Again, I'm actually working in this space, so it's very, very topical. I'm a great supporter of decentralization and decongestion, as you know from my public posts. So I'm currently working on decentralized modal solutions, you know, modal shift solutions, that not all roads lead to one location. So, you know, taking pressure off the system, moving freight from road to rail, and you know, aggregating around that, putting services around that. So some of the work that I have been doing is in that space, to overlap transport, freight, different modes, and that's transferable across the country. So, and fits in obviously with the Golden Triangle, but some of that work is Waikato based, and some of it is Bay of Plenty based. So I think infrastructure is something that we can really shift thinking and progress on in the next 2 to 5 years.
Yep. Okay. Rightio, that was an easy topic. Should we move on? Or no one else wants to say anything about that? So how about we talk further about, is now the right time for us to be shifting in more of an environmental conscious, for us to flip a switch, not just for tourism, but for also the New Zealand Inc. Brand, as well as, of course, our own quality of life and well-being. Is this a shift that the community and government should be taking now, Heather?
I think actually sustainability is a really important topic now. I mean, we've been known as Clean Green New Zealand. I mean, we're known globally for that, but it gives us a chance now to think about what can we do moving forward. There's been lots of conversation and debate about that one of our exporting markets that will really oomph up is actually our value-added products that in terms of our agricultural products, our horticultural products. And the first thing that often comes to mind is people go, oh, we'll stick more cows, we'll stick more sheep, we'll actually utilize the land more, without thinking of the sustainability aspect and the impact that that's actually going to have on New Zealand. So I think we do need to think about, yes, okay, so we will be able to potentially export. We can differentiate ourselves on our quality of what our produce is, but we need to do that with traceability with a sustainability angle. So actually, if we're looking at traceability with technology is so amazing. If we want to be able to sell our product overseas at a premium price, we need to ensure we're doing the best thing back here. Because in practice, I actually don't think we have done it that particularly well. There's so many debates with Fonterra, the regional councils about what's going on in terms of water, all of those things. We need to bring those players together. We've got an opportunity to go one of two ways. Either we farm more and we don't think about sustainability, and actually the clean green potentially goes completely out of the door. Or we say, how do we get the best bang for our buck of our produce overseas that we're selling it, but how do we do it with traceability back to a sustainable mantra of who we actually are? And again, I don't have the solution, but we've got the opportunity to collaborate now about how we create that for New Zealand. Because as well as Mark talking about there's going to be new industries popping up, I think we've also got the ability to look at the industries that we do have that are in horticulture and our dairy and the likes of all of our primary products here, and think about how can we do it in a more sustainable manner.
Mark Lister, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, we could be here all day talking about those topics, to be honest. It's such a broad range. Yes, I completely agree that we need to find our niche in the world, and we need to find an angle that we can sell to the rest of the world to sort of maintain that niche, because we're an exporting nation, and if we're facing a world that is sort of retrenching and going more insular, that's a major threat to New Zealand. So we need to find ways to make our products right across the board more interesting, more engaging, and more in demand, and we want to sell them for a higher price. So completely agree. Fonterra is probably not the company that we want to sort of use as a benchmark for that. You know, a poorly run company, I think the only company that's sort of been less well run that's sort of been mentioned today is Ports of Auckland, which you'd put in that same basket. Don't sort of use either of those sort of as your model for how to do things or how to run a business. More broadly across those agricultural sectors, I think there are aspects that we do really well, and I just think about some of the higher profile ones on the share market, whether it's A2 Milk, Delegates, you know, from the Marlborough with wine, Scales, who are big in apples, out of the Hawke's Bay. There are kiwi fruit in this part of the world. There are lots of those primary industries that we do well. And yeah, we want to run with that theme. We want to do more of that. You know, the one thing amongst all of this that you've seen over the last 6 or 8 weeks, the one thing that has really held us in good stead is the fact that the rest of the world still needs to eat. And one of the products, everything's been stopped dead in its tracks, whether it's logs, whether it's whatever else, food's still been getting through. That's why A2 Milk share price is up still 25% this year, amongst all of this drama, because we do have this wonderful luxury of being a great food producer, and the world is still seeing increasing demand for that. So we need to get on that bandwagon, do it better, pitch it sort of higher up the food chain, up the value chain, and somehow drive bigger margins out of it.
Okay. Mark Wassung, any further to add on that, or?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Again, innovative things. One of my clients is one of the biggest avocado exporters in the Bay, and we're collaborating at the moment on clean and green recycled materials combined with bark to do basically holding water in the ground for agriculture. So retaining water to compost system, and we you know, there's innovation happening all over the place. I think you just got to get out there and find it. So and regarding, you know, anything clean and green, I've been a great supporter of this since university days. I've got a solar array on my roof, and I've got an electric car, and we've got rainwater harvesting as well. So, you know, so sort of try and weave that into most projects. Some clients deflect it, but yeah, I'm a great supporter of clean and green. And as I mentioned earlier, there's electric autonomous vehicles coming, and believe it or not, we've actually got the resources and the technology in the Bay here in Tauranga West to actually build electric vehicles, and the examples of those that are working at the moment, so it is real, is in Wellington. The double deckers are all electric buses. The ones that are running around on the Tauranga system are not, but just to say that, you know, we don't have to rely on everyone else. We can actually look to ourselves to be innovative rather than always having this long supply chain you're talking about, Heather. I absolutely agree. We should be looking local and focusing on innovation here.
Okay, good points. We've got another question from Chris. Chris said Mark spoke about there was there were a number of sectors doing well under the COVID environment. What are the panelists' thoughts about the opportunity that exists with the greater engagement with the Bay of Plenty hinterland and primary sector, hort and ag, and further added value in those sectors?
I think that probably we've probably touched on some of those issues in that last section, to be honest. But yeah, look, this is a time when we need to think about sort of the links we've got with, the wider region, sort of the regional partners, and the strengths that we've got, and those have already been sort of singled out as some of our strengths. Some of those, we're not a typical dairy region. That's not a bad thing, but we are sort of still very strong in that primary space. So yeah, I would absolutely agree. There is certainly an opportunity for us to sort of do more in that regard. It's ultimately going to come down to, we've got to have a product that people want to buy, though. That's what we've got to think about. Where is the world going to be in 5 years or 10 years, and what is that sort of massive middle class, whether it's out of India or China or wherever? That's our future customer. We're not selling stuff to each other. We're too small. We produce much more than we can consume. So what does that end market look like? What does that customer look like? And what are they willing to pay up for?
And that's where, in many senses, they're looking to the brand New Zealand, to what they're actually paying for. So we need to think holistically. As you pointed out, Mark, we are about niche product overseas, when we need to go back and have a look at how we're promoting New Zealand. And I think this does come back to the sustainability debate. And that's the one thing that we can turn around and say, if we're smart about it, we can keep on ensuring that we're focusing on sustainability to drive that demand for the premium product, and that traceability, using technology to be able to trace, to be able to, as Mark talked about the avocados, being able to tell the story of how they're actually developing those avocados, growing them, and therefore the quality of the product that's actually being delivered. So I think, yes, there is lots that we can do in that space, but we do have to focus on who the customers are, because I agree with you, we are too small to be all of the customers. We are such a small player here in New Zealand.
Hi, Heather. I think you need a job in my office. What you've just described is actually what we're working on as another project with that client, is to create an authentic experience of a real live avocado orchard, and also my client does kiwi fruit as well, gold kiwi fruit. So it's 78 hectares as well. So it's just a fabulous environment, and you can feel it's almost like a forest you get lost in, and it's adjacent to water as well, and it's close to Tauranga. So we're looking at exactly that, to create an authentic experience and aggregate around that the various attractions, and looking at, I don't want to divulge too much, but other facilities that are aggregated or related to that.
Right, maybe in the future we can get Peter Wren Hilton from Agritech New Zealand, who's a chamber member with War 42, and he's providing a direct connection between New Zealand and Silicon Valley, with a bunch of value add and precision agriculture technology that New Zealand is really leading the way in, and maybe that's a topic for the future for us to delve into. Just in terms of one last round of questioning, obviously tomorrow I'm pretty privileged to be interviewing Minister Grant Robertson, Minister of Finance. We usually do a post-budget analysis session with him, but we're quite lucky this year to have a pre-budget session with him at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in a similar setting. I was just wondering, from each of the panelists, what would be your number one question that you would want to ask Grant tomorrow?
I've got a long list of questions I'd ask Grant. So you talk to me afterwards, Matt, if you want to have a few extras up your sleeve. But look, I guess, we can all focus on sort of the short-term issues that we're trying to solve. And there's lots of questions. And when I say short-term, I mean over the next 1 or 2 years. I would be really interested to know sort of how he sees, I guess one of the lingering issues from all this is that we're going to have this almighty government debt burden, much higher than we've ever had in the past, and that's true of every country in the world. So we're not alone there. But when we're left with this almighty burden that we have borrowed to sort of shore things up and sort of keep the safety net there and save as many jobs and businesses as we can, what are we going to do about that in the longer term? Are we just going to live with that higher debt level? Is that possible? Is that an option? Or is that going to come, are we going to have to solve that problem by raising taxes on everybody in the future, cutting spending? Is he going to have to address that elephant in the room that no politician is brave enough to address, which is superannuation and the retirement age? You know, how does he, what's the offset? You know, it's not just a money tree that has no consequences down the track. So he won't answer that question, obviously, but I'll be really interested to hear you ask it and sort of, you know, watch him squirm.
Yeah, I've been really interested in all of my talk in the media and other points that I'm raising is that money to businesses has actually been very minor. It's gone, the wage subsidies were direct to staff. It went through the business, but went 100% to staff. The secured lending, you know, there wasn't actually any money exchange other than perhaps a bit of security that the government may lose. And of course, the only real sort of cash has really been the tax incentive. With the loss carryback, where that's probably for those that are operating in a profit environment pre this, you know, which is for them, but not a lot of small businesses would really benefit from that as they're running pretty thin margins and constantly reinvesting in their business to try and make improvements. So I'm just conscious of the political will of saying, look, businesses receive billions of dollars, they should pay back, which I think is a bit flawed. But anyway, Heather, your thoughts?
I completely agree with everything Mark said. He stole all of my questions, but I'm going to put it in this context. For our children, what is the world going to look like in 10 years' time from a financial perspective? In terms of what's our economy going to look like for our children in 10 years' time? Those that are still going through secondary school, primary and secondary school now, because decisions that they're making now about how they've bailed us out, but how are we going to finance ourselves into the future? How are we going to repay that debt back? Has an implication on, yes, possibly us for our retirement and our superannuation, but actually a bigger one on that next generation coming through.
Yep, very good topic. Yeah, I'll add that to the list. Thanks, Heather. Mark Wilson?
My question would be, how do we engage with, or how do we activate more of the CRP projects? Because I understand there's been some 2,000 projects submitted over the last, well, during the lockdown, that was when the submission was. I'm personally involved with 5 of them. So, you know, it's going to be a lolly scramble, and it doesn't really allow for private sector involvement as well. So I would like to see some sort of model where it's a PPP or some other mechanism to engage more people, because there's going to be a lot of very unhappy people that have spent a lot of time at risk and have big teams behind them that have submitted that are going to be disappointed with that. So I think the key is to get people connected and working and using their skills. And there was, I just think, yeah, but hopefully we'll get 1 or 2 or maybe more out of that, but we could lose out as well. And so it is perhaps to look at different models and look at ways of engaging rather than just the few getting opportunities.
Hey, Mark Lister, just curious on your final thoughts on that around their approach to that government funding. Will they have a scramble approach to make sure every region has something, or will there be some bigger New Zealand Inc. plan that they will try and drive through?
Yeah, interesting. I don't know, to be honest. I think some of the other things that I'm sort of thinking about is, and I'm bearing in mind that that it is an election year, so there's also an underlying incentive to, you know, stay in power, which is always something you've got to be wary of when you sort of see some of these big policies come out. But the approach at the moment has been fairly blunt and broad brush, and it's a bit of a shotgun approach. Now that can't last forever. So another sort of aspect that I would like to sort of hear from the Minister about tomorrow is, does sort of he see a risk of the government, you know, being in a position not too far down the track where they start picking the winners and losers? Because I think you sort of end up in quite dangerous territory when the government decides which industries and which regions it should sort of support at the expense of others. And then that creates a different kind of inequality where you've got, you know, we're essentially sort of subsidizing areas that sort of shouldn't be at the expense of others. And there's a bit of a moral hazard there, you know. Yeah, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with sort of Shane Jones out and about sort of choosing who should sort of get the special treatment and who shouldn't. So I think that is something that's a little bit concerning, and I'd be really interested in sort of hearing how how the minister sort of sees that playing out. How hands-on and hands-off will the government be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 1 year from now?
Great. Heather or Mark Wassung, any final thoughts?
No, I actually completely just agree with what Mark has just said. And it came back to, I think, a comment that was made last week on your webinar series, which was actually business needs to be involved with some of these decisions. And it actually has to be all of the industries, just not a select few who have got loud voices. And I think that's absolutely critical moving forward.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to say that business to business and business to council and council to government, central government and local government, just closer communication. And what an amazing time, I think, for businesses that are traditionally isolated in their silos to cross connect. And in my industry, I get the opportunity to work with engineers and planners and clients and specialists. So I'm suggesting that could be a way forward in architecture. It's multidisciplinary, and our technology actually allows us through the cloud to have one set of drawings and everyone can access that. So maybe something like that. I'm just using that as an analogy, that we actually find a CAD system or a cloud-based system where businesses interact and we connect and help each other.
Great. Okay, look, I'm pleased with how well this has gone today. Heather, Mark and Mark, it's been an absolute delight having you on. I don't see any questions in the chat. I think considering you all come from very different backgrounds, there's been a lot of common themes coming about. Basically, following the customer's different changing opportunities, what's happening with our environmental and brand New Zealand and how we're going to double down on that. And a couple of other things around infrastructure and engaging the primary sectors to help us achieve a lot of things. And of course, our focus on social housing and making sure that minimum needs are achieved to avoid causing pretty deep scars in our communities. Look, thank you very much. Delighted to those 30-ish people that were able to attend. Just because of Vodafone's little IT issues. But look, thank you very much. Thanks, Anne and Jeanette, for helping me co-host and being backups in case I couldn't turn up. And yeah, we'll be back soon with next week with some further details. Otherwise, don't forget 8 o'clock tomorrow with Minister Grant Robertson. Check our Chamber website for any details. And I'll catch you tomorrow, hopefully. Thanks, everyone.